Hello, everybody, and welcome back to UXChange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hello, hola, bonjour, et bon dia. Happy to be back. I will be kickstarting this series of episodes dedicated to note taking. So, note taking is a dear topic of mine because I'm super interested in taking notes at every moment of my day, when I'm learning, when I'm in a meeting, when I want to keep information for further reading, for instance, or to integrate information better. This topic is particularly important to me because as a user experience researcher, we have to conduct interviews with participants, with users of your product, of your service, of your technology, let's say, or of your system. And so I never really thought of it this way, note-taking. I never thought of note-taking as being that ubiquitous to my activity. But I thought that this episode could be interesting for anyone who needs to take notes on a daily basis or on a regular basis. So this episode could totally be useful for students, professionals taking notes in meetings. But it's true that I will focus essentially on the role of user experience researcher, meaning the people conducting interviews with end users and taking notes to be able to read these notes later. Obviously, for the people who are part of the UX design process, part of the user-centered design process and design thinking process overall, it's not necessarily user experience researchers who take notes in this process. It can be a user experience designer, it can be a product manager, it can be user experience research manager, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to constrain too much the tips and guidance that I'm about to give you. So at any point, it's true that it's possible that I will make a focus on user experience research because you will see that a lot of the tips and techniques apply to this field and came to my attention for me when I was exercising as a user experience researcher, but it could also apply to other fields. And so without further ado, let's jump right in. So first of all, I want to give a little bit of an introduction by kind of making clear how note-taking can make or break a research quality process. Also, I want to cover some evolution in terms of note-taking in user experience research, how it was before, how it is right now, and also the common misconceptions about research note-taking. So, first of all, the quality of your notes when you're a researcher, and this is the same for any other activity. Imagine you are a student and you want to take notes for let's say, the final exam, or you want to learn more about a topic, and so on and so forth. So there are several, let's say, depending on your end use of your notes, of course, you will not conceptualize it the same way, and you will not give it the same importance. However, there are some disciplines in which taking notes are crucial. So let's say, for me, the very minimum is if you are a professional knowledge worker and you have to take notes during the meetings. And so it is crucial that you're able to take accurate notes, because then you will be able to, let's say, for instance, send a report to everybody who was attending the meeting and have everyone aligned on the topics. So this is something that we are led to, we need to conduct on a regular basis if you are a knowledge worker. So this is the very minimum. And so the tips that I'm about to give today as UX researcher could also apply to that as the bare minimum. And then we could progress when we consider jobs, or let's say professions, in which you need to take note on a regular basis because it's inherent, it's part of your job. So for instance, if I'm a user experience researcher and I have to interact with participants, I need to be able to take notes from my interviews with my participants. Because if I don't do this, you will see later in the podcast, it can greatly affect my ability to give accurate conclusions. So in a nutshell, I can already tell you, relying too much on memory can break your conclusions. Let's be honest, and I will tell you some stories of mine. So it can make or it can break your research activity. So it's very difficult. In a way, it's a process you have to learn to be a great note taker. So imagine you don't take any notes when you're in an interview with a participant as a user researcher, for instance. It's great. This is one extreme. You will be totally engaged on the participant, and you will be able to discuss with this participant in a lively manner and in a respectful manner, because you will have all your attention given to this person. And this also applies for, let's say, lectures. If you're at a lecture and you want to take notes and you don't take any note, it's true that in the very moment, if your attention is 100% on the lecturer, you will be integrating information more easily. I compared this in my studies with and without taking notes. Even if we think otherwise, if you take notes while you are trying to listen to someone, it will not be the same. That's why the great note takers and the great thinkers and writers always give us the advice that when we want to learn a topic, it's better to listen to it first or read about it and then close it, and only then taking notes, because then it will be your word, it will be your thought process, and it will be your integration of the topic, and it will be your perspective of it. So you will add one dimension which is unique to you, because you will take note of only what is relevant to you. So on one extreme we have that. However, when you interact with a user during a user experience research process, if you don't take notes, you will need to come back to this interview. So imagine you're able to record the interview, which is not a given. It can happen in some situations that you're not even able to record the meetings. I remember back then when I was conducting my first research interviews, I don't know for what reason, to be honest. Probably we didn't have the technology, even though in my memory it's kind of weird, because I remember in smartphones back then, like 8 years ago, we already had voice memos available, but I remember it was not that widespread, at least in the positions that I had to record user sessions. And so then you would lose the information simply. We can also imagine another scenario in which you record the information, you record what your participant is saying, even though you will not only double but triple the time you take to analyze your insight, to analyze your data, to come up with insights. You have the first moment when you're conducting the interview, you have the second moment when you are listening to it, and in my opinion, this moment is like the double of the time it takes at least to run the interview, because you need to listen, pause, take notes, listen, pause, take notes. And so that's why I really advise against relying solely on a recorder or on a voice memo, basically. And so we can already think about why it's so important to have some notes. So then we can imagine another extreme in which you take like endlessly notes during your interview, and we can already conceptualize the idea that it's not possible to interact in a human manner with your participant. It's not possible, because your attention and your brain will be oriented towards taking notes. And so whatever we want to say, I can tell you the brain has a given amount of attention span in one given moment, first of all, and then over time, we also have, let's say, a given quantity available of energy and attention. So in one given moment, our attention can be divided, but you cannot create attention. You can only divide it. So if you have 100%, let's imagine, depending on everyone's preferences and skills, you will divide it in 50% hearing what your participant is saying and 50% taking notes. That's one scenario. But we can also imagine that the more you do it during the day, the more you accumulate your user sessions, the more you will be burnt out, let's say. So you will be less and less able to take relevant notes, or less and less able to ask relevant questions. So with all that being said, we can already understand the fact that there are some extremes when we want to take notes, and this applies to any discipline, even if you are a student or in any situation. So there are extremes, and then you will already understand my point of view is that is to take the best of both worlds. So it's to take a bit of note-taking and a bit of listening and a bit of interacting, but I will tell you how and why in the rest of this episode, of course. So we already touched upon the extremes, and then of course the common misconceptions about research note-taking is these two extremes. Basically, as a summary, I can tell you one misconception could be, oh, no worries, we record it and then we will take note of it in the future. That's wrong to only rely on that. Only rely on, because you're not doing yourself or your future self a favor, basically. If you have no other way, of course, I'm not saying don't do it, because it's still better than, for instance, having no data. Yes, and I've been through this. But I'm just trying to convey you my experience and trying to avoid you to repeat the same mistakes as I did, basically. And this applies to, again and again, to lectures. I've been in the first year of medical school, and I remember in some classes I would think, this goes too fast, I will not take any note and I will listen to it after. Yes, in one aspect it was great, but in another one I was losing again the time in the future. So just think about what does it imply. And then of course the other misconception is that we need to take note of everything, every little detail, we need to take note of it. So that's another misconception, and I wanted to communicate that to you today. And then of course we will go over the evolution of note-taking in UX research. I touched a bit on different topics such as recording. Then of course we will talk about the inclusion of note takers in your user research sessions. To be honest, when I first started as a user experience researcher, I did not have that. Probably it was only me. Probably it was only my positions back then in my companies. But I remember that asking someone to come to my sessions and take notes would be like crazy. But again, I started in my early days and in my first positions in very corporate companies, and so probably was not the culture as well. I don't know. I'm just sharing my perspective here. And so that was like first end of the spectrum. We have no taking notes, no recording, then we could record and take notes after, then we have note takers, and we can also conceptualize that now we have some software that do the note taking for us and that do analyze data for us. So in this episode, I want you to at least learn one thing around the following themes. I will cover, let's say, some techniques when it comes to taking notes, some do's and don'ts, how to apply all this knowledge, the fact that we are ourselves as note takers, different personas. We also should accept this reality. I'm not the same kind of note taker as my neighbor during the lecture. Everyone will take notes in a different way. And we should also try to some extent, accept this reality and make our tools work for us. In the end, we should design for our life. We should be the designers of our life, be it professional or personal, and we should make our habits and ways of working fit as much as possible with our preferences, so that basically we flourish. The idea is not to use a process that is working against me because it will make me less efficient. So let's start with, first of all, understanding the different kind of personas when it comes to note taking. This, I can tell you about this, and I'm sure there are many, many other studies around this topic, around productivity. I see some YouTube channels around the topic. Some of them are very famous, so I'm sure you know them already. But I can tell you my perspective regarding research and what I found. So it was a research that I did in one of my previous companies, and we had the task of improving the note-taking practice inside the company. So basically, I'm a user experience researcher and I need to run some user research sessions. But we know already, because the company is quite mature in terms of UX, we know that note-taking at the same time that I'm running the interview is counterproductive. So it would be best if we had someone take notes besides me, basically. So we already know that. However, we could observe in past user interviews that, first of all, different people would take notes different ways, and that sometimes the notes were not usable the way they were taken, basically. So we were tasked, let's say me and some other colleagues, with the goal of improving the note-taking practice. We didn't know where to start, basically, because it's kind of optimizing a process among people who themselves optimize processes and products. So it's like doing research on the people doing research and doing design. And so at first you think, is this really happening? So it was really interesting. It was really interesting because I thought, wow, I get to improve my own process and improve the processes of my peers. And that's at this time that I thought everything is design. And that's why I'm so passionate around design and research. Everything around us is design. Everything, like, it goes from the most trivial thing to the most complex, of course. So if you think about a car, this is design. Yes, but the way you design your bedroom, this is design. The way you write on your notebook every day, this is design, and so on and so forth. The way you schedule your meetings, this is design. Like, you take decisions in order to solve a problem, and this is design, basically. And so the thing is, we apply this principle to improve the practice of professionals who were ourselves. So myself, UX researcher, and some other UX designers. And so we were like, okay, we need to come up with a solution to improve note-taking practices. But then we thought, okay, let's just step back and think about the fact that when we design about something, not everyone has the same needs. And this is like the basics of user experience design. You do something for a given audience or market research and marketing overall. We know that we have market needs, and when we develop a product, we try to think about the product market fit, for instance. And so this is the basics, and this applies to everyone, every user of any process or feature or service, ourselves included. We are not in isolation. We are not protected, let's say, or we are not strangers to this phenomenon. So if we want to develop a process to improve the note-taking practice, we need to make sure what are the needs of people who are taking notes. And so we also need to think about the hypothesis. It was a strong assumption, but we thought probably people have different ways and preferences of taking notes. And so that's why we went with the goal of doing simple user interviews. So we interviewed product managers, user experience designers, user experience researchers, data analysts, and so on. And we asked them about their pain points, their expectations, their needs when it comes to taking notes. And I was impressed. I was surprised with the results. I would not have thought about this. So we observed that there are more or less 4 personas, at least in my study. Probably there are more, or probably some of them can be, let's say, merged. But I observed that depending on the amount of notes you want to take, depending on your preparation, depending on the help you want to receive, we have several personas. So, for instance, we have the transcriber. It's the person who will take note of everything. Of course, these personas apply when you do not take part in the interview itself, when you're not the one asking questions, because if you're the one asking questions, it will not work. But I observed that people coming to the interview would be, for instance, some people would take note of everything, word by word. Then we would have other people who would focus on the key points, who would only highlight and take notes of really striking elements. Then we would have some people who are more like visual thinkers and that are more like, let's say, free flow. They will do sketches, they will draw, they will organize their thoughts with diagrams, for instance. And then the last one, which was very interesting, was the structured organizer. We had people who would take notes, but in a very, very structured manner. And for these people, they will need templates. And so, first of all, as I said previously, these types, thinking styles, by the way, I would call them thinking styles, to borrow the term that was coined by Indy Young, thinking styles, because at least from my perspective, you can be in one type of, let's say, note-taking practice in one day, and the next you can be another one. That being said, I also think that there are interpersonal differences, so we are more geared towards one type or another. I can already tell you, my type is to take note of everything. I'm this type of person. When I was in medical school, I took note, even by hand, in the classes I could, everything, like almost every word. I would, like, for me, it almost works. It helps me to integrate the ideas. But I can get it that for some people it's probably not efficient and to be able to follow with everything. It really depends. Do what's best for you. But my point is, basically, you could try to ask yourself several questions, like, how do I prefer to take notes? By hand or by typing on a computer? What amount of notes do I prefer to take? Do I prefer to take note of everything or only key ideas? Do I prefer to sketch and draw, or do I prefer to have a very structured process? And once you know that, and probably you will not know directly the answers to these questions by simply asking yourself. Probably not. But probably something that can help is to make a little bit of introspection and thinking about this retrospectively and thinking, okay, in the last whatever 10 meetings, or in the last 6 months if you're a student, or in the last lecture, how did I take notes? How did it go? Did I like the process or not? And so on and so forth. So apply the user-centered methodology to yourself and to your practice to be constantly improving, basically. So then over time you will probably be able to change, and you will probably have different preferences. So for instance, now with time I can tell you I enjoy way less taking notes because I want to be fully present in the moment. So what I do at the end of my meetings is I often ask with the person I'm in the meeting with, okay, let's step back and summarize what we said. And usually at the scale of one meeting, as you are two, it's way easier than to do it after and relying on memory and being alone. So that's my tip right now. And however, this doesn't work in a user experience research interview. You cannot not take notes of anything and then ask your participant at the end, okay, let's step back and summarize what we said, because you will for sure lose ideas. So basically, this is the first idea that I wanted to share. We have personas and or thinking styles, because this can evolve through time. The idea is that in your company, so if you're a user experience researcher running user interviews, think about the process to adapt as much as possible the experience of taking notes for your note taker, so that you and him or her can flourish together, and so that you're not imposing any tool. For instance, I can tell you, I talk to people who would tell me, I absolutely do not want to be constrained to a format. I don't want any Miro or Fig Jamboard. I don't want that, because I want to take notes my way. This is what works for me. I had people telling me, I want a template. I want you to tell me that I need XYZ information to be captured. I had people tell me, well, it would be great to have a meeting beforehand to understand better what you expect from me, but I will take notes by hand, for instance. So think about that. There are several methodologies, and try to talk to your note taker. This can apply to any job in which you need someone by your side to take notes, basically. Then, in terms of user experience research, what we should capture at least as much as possible, what we should strive to capture. So, if you listen to the previous episodes, you might be already familiar with the idea of triangulating your user experience research, meaning capturing data from several types. So it can be quantitative, counting events that happened. It can be qualitative, what the participants said. Sorry, not only what they say, but like something that can be described with words. That is the qualitative part. It can be attitudinal. This means what the participants said to you about something. But sometimes what participants say is not the same as what they do. I can tell you, I really, I hate this pop-up, for instance. But every time I see the pop-up, I will click and I will buy the product that is suggested to me. My behavior will not be the same as my attitude. So keep that in mind. So that's why it's important to, let's say, cross-pollinate the type of data you have to be able to come up with more informed conclusions, for instance. So as some ideas that I would take note of, it would be, for instance, as nonverbal cues, you can have body language. What is the facial expression of your participant? If you sense some hesitations, pauses, navigation patterns, for instance, first they clicked on add to cart, and then when they were in the cart, they clicked on previous, and then they went back on add to cart. Or when they were looking for clothes, sport clothes on a website, they would look for first by gender. Oh no, and then they went back and they looked first for sport category. And so these things are very important to notice because they can tell you at the end of a task. And this is true story. I had people telling me on a scale of 1 to 10, which by the way is a wrong way of to be honest, this is not the best and accurate way to measure how someone experiences something, to ask on a scale for a qualitative interview. But sometimes in company setting, this is used to give us trends. So as a parenthesis and as a side note. But anyway, at the end of some user sessions, I ask participants on a scale of 1 to 7, for instance, how easy or difficult was this task? And they would tell me 7, 7, 7 in a row. Everything was super easy. But then when you look at the data, they would go back and forth. They would spend time, more than 30 seconds on a screen, and so on. So you clearly see that there are some issues. Either they want to please you, or for them, this is their level of easy. And for them, this is acceptable, some back and forth. However, it's probably acceptable for them because they know that and because they are used to that. They are used to navigate back and forth. But probably we could still improve the process and we could delight them. So, by the way, I mean here standards. If for them this is the neutral, if you improve the process because you see that pragmatically speaking and behaviorally speaking, this is not optimal, it means you will delight them if you improve it because they're not expecting that. So that's why it's sometimes so important. You can also take note of tone of voice, physical reactions, and the like. Of course, what do they say? The words, emotions. If they mention some emotion, this, in my opinion, this is like double importance. This is double important because when you will communicate your insights, you will be able to relay them in a way that is much more empathetic and that is impactful to your stakeholders. If I say half of my participants didn't find the add to cart button, for instance, and if I say they mentioned being frustrated and really disappointed with this interface, it's not the same as if I don't say it. So my point of view is really when you have emotions along the way, really take note of that. And if they don't mention that, try to ask them, how does that make you feel? And then, of course, take notes of other things if you can, and this can be post-session analysis, such as the time it took to perform the task, some environmental factors to relate with several of your participants. Was it in the morning, in the evening, after a long day of work? Probably that can impact as well the results. So for today, that would be it for this episode. I wanted to communicate some really, in my opinion, important topics. And as a summary, we learned today that there are several types of note takers, and yourself, myself included, we are all different types of note takers in different areas, by the way, of our lives. For instance, if I take notes in a lecture, it would not be the same as if I take notes in a meeting. We should also take that in mind, have that in mind. And so, considering that, we should adapt our note-taking practice accordingly so that we can flourish and that we can be the best of ourselves, basically. And so you can apply that to yourself, but also to the person taking notes for you. And then, as a summary, what you should be striving to take notes about when you're doing user research would be several, let's say, types of data: the behavioral, the attitudinal, qualitative, some data that can be counted afterwards, so quantitative, for instance, and basically like patterns, back and forth movements, and so on and so forth. So that would be it for today's episode. I hope you liked it as much as I did. More episodes are coming. For instance, in the next steps, we will talk about some tools you can use to improve your note-taking. We will talk about how you can set up your environment, how you can probably prepare with your note-taker, how you can prepare some templates, and we will also cover what you can do post sessions with your note takers to, let's say, synthesize all the data you came up with. Some do's and don'ts, of course, and basically that. I hope you learned at least one thing. As always, if it's the case, please subscribe and share with anyone who might be interested in the show. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on UXChange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.